The user wants a very long, multi-part story about an HOA Karen character, focusing on her actions and their consequences, with specific instructions on length, tone, pacing, and ending. This is a text generation request that does not involve rendering text in an image. I will proceed with generating the first part of the story. Adhering to all the user's instructions, the shrill of the whistle pierced the tranquil afternoon like a rogue mosquito in a silent mosque. Agnes Periwinkle, president of the Willow Creek Estates Homeowners Association and self-appointed guardian of its aesthetic sanctity, lowered the bright yellow plastic toy from her lips with the triumphant air of a five-star general after a successful siege. Her target, Bartholomew, a ceramic garden gnome with a cheerfully painted fishing rod, currently residing in the flower bed of Lot 14B, occupied by the newly arrived and suspiciously unfestive Mr. Omar Hassan. Violation. Agnes declared to the bewildered Robin perched on the meticulously manicured privet hedge. Section 3, subsection B. Paragraph 7 of the HOA bylaws clearly states that all lawn ornaments must be pre-approved by the Architectural Review Committee, and Bartholomew, she gestured with the whistle, has not graced our agenda. Mr. Hassan, a mild-mannered accountant with a penchant for early morning tea on his patio, emerged from his house, a frown creasing his usually placid face. Excuse me, Mrs. Periwinkle, is there a problem? Agnes puffed out her chest, the power of the HOA bylaws coursing through her veins. Indeed, there is. Mr. Hassan, your gnome, she said the word with the same distaste one might reserve for a particularly stubborn weed. It is in direct violation of our community standards. Mr. Hassan blinked. Bartholomew, but he's just a bit of fun. Fun, Agnes scoffed, adjusting her oversized spectacles, which seemed to magnify her already formidable gaze. We have rules for a reason, Mr. Hassan, to maintain property values and ensure the harmonious visual landscape of Willow Creek Estates. Bartholomew, with his jaunty fishing rod, disrupts the established aesthetic. Unseen by either of them, Mrs. Rodriguez from across the street was subtly recording the exchange on her smartphone, a mischievous glint in her eye. She'd been waiting for Agnes to target someone new since the great hydrangea debacle of the previous summer. But I just put him there yesterday, Mr. Hassan protested, gesturing helplessly at the empty patch of soil where Bartholomew had stood moments before, and as his whistle-induced intervention. I didn't realize. Ignorance of the law is no excuse. Mr. Hassan, Agnes stated, her voice sharp. She cradled Bartholomew under her arm like a captured trophy. You will need to submit a formal request to the Architectural Review Committee for consideration. In the meantime, she tightened her grip on the gnome. Bartholomew will be held in impound. Impound? Mr. Hassan stared at her, aghast. You've impounded my garden gnome. Temporarily detained for aesthetic re-education, Agnes corrected, her lips twitching into a smug smile. The forms are available on the HOA website, under Ornamentation Compliance. She turned on her heel. Bartholomew nestled securely against her floral print cardigan, leaving Mr. Hassan standing dumbfounded on his lawn. Later that evening, Agnes sat at her kitchen table, the confiscated Bartholomew presiding over a stack of meticulously organized HOA documents. She hummed a little tune as she filled out an impoundment receipt, noting the date, time, and the specific violation. She felt a profound sense of satisfaction. Order had been maintained. The visual integrity of Willow Creek Estates remained unblemished. The next morning, however, Agnes awoke to a shock. Her own front lawn, usually a testament to her unwavering commitment to neighborhood standards, had been decorated. Overnight, a veritable army of garden gnomes had materialized. Gnomes of all shapes and sizes. Fishing gnomes, gardening gnomes, sleeping gnomes, even a rather risk gnome, sunbathing on a tiny ceramic towel. Each one seemed to be pointed directly at her house, their painted eyes conveying a silent, ceramic accusation. Agnes's jaw dropped. This was an outrage, a direct affront to her authority. She marched out onto her lawn, her slippers sinking slightly into the damp morning grass. Mrs. Rodriguez was across the street, watering her petunias, a wide knowing smile playing on her lips. Morning, Agnes, she called out sweetly. Lovely display you have there, Agnes glared. Did you do this, Maria? Mrs. Rodriguez simply shrugged, her smile widening. Me. I just enjoy a bit of whimsical garden art. It seems quite popular in the neighborhood now. Indeed, as Agnes surveyed the street, she noticed a few other new gnomes had appeared in various yards, almost as if in solidarity with the impounded Bartholomew. This was escalating quickly. Agnes stormed back into her house, Bartholomew still sitting innocently on her kitchen counter. This was not how things were supposed to go. She was the enforcer, the guardian of the rules, not the target of some gnome rebellion. She decided on a course of action. A special emergency meeting of the HOA board was required. This blatant disregard for the bylaws could not go unpunished. She would rally the board, issue violation notices to every gnome offender, and restore order to Willow Creek Estates, one ceramic figurine at a time. Little did Agnes know that this was just the beginning of a series of escalating events that would challenge her authority. expose her own inconsistencies, and ultimately lead to a confrontation far more significant than a mere garden gnome. The great gnome heist had inadvertently set in motion a chain of reactions that would unravel the carefully constructed fabric of Agnes Periwinkle's well-ordered world. Part 2. The bylaw bombardment. The emergency meeting of the Willow Creek Estates HOA board was convened not in the sterile, soulless community clubhouse, but in the sanctum sanctorum of Agnes Periwinkle's own dining room. The mahogany table, polished to a mirror shine, reflected the grim faces of the board members she had summoned via a series of increasingly frantic emails, titled Urgent, Insurrection, and Anarchy. At the head of the table, Agnes presided, a stack of bylaws bound in a pristine white binder placed before her like a holy text. To her right sat Timothy Finch, the treasurer, a man whose spine seemed to have been surgically replaced with a length of cooked spaghetti. He nervously adjusted his tie, his gaze darting between Agnes and the impounded Bartholomew, who had been given a place of honor on the sideboard, a silent ceramic witness to the proceedings. Across from Timothy was Brenda Scoggins, the board secretary and the neighborhood's primary node of information exchange. Brenda's interest in HOA business was directly proportional to its potential for gossip, and her eyes, magnified by her Katai glasses, gleamed with the thrill of the unfolding drama. At the far end of the table, slouching in his chair, as if trying to merge with the upholstery, was Gary Larson. Gary had only agreed to serve on the board after a lengthy campaign by his wife, who believed it would get him out of the house. His platform had consisted of a single issue, replacing the splintering wooden swing set in the community park with a modern plastic one. So far, his efforts had been consistently tabled in favor of debates on approved shades of beige for mailbox posts. "Thank you all for coming on such short notice," Agnes began, her voice resonating with the gravity of a wartime prime minister. "As you are all aware, our community is under siege." Gary suppressed a snort, poorly disguising it as a cough. "Under siege, Agnes, by who?" "The Smurfs." Agnes's eyes narrowed into slits. "By chaos, Gary. By a flagrant, coordinated disregard for the very rules that protect our property values and prevent this neighborhood from descending into a visual cacophony of kitsch and poor taste." She tapped the white binder. "I am, of course, referring to the gnome infestation." Brenda leaned forward, her pen poised over her notepad. "Oh, it's just awful, Agnes. The Millers on Crestview now have one that's, well, it's mooning. The street it's ceramic, of course, but the implication," Timothy Finch paled, "a mooning gnome. Good heavens, is that covered in Section 4, Public Decency and Ornamentation?" "It is a mockery of everything we stand for," Agnes declared, ignoring Timothy's procedural query. "It began with Mr. Hassan on Lot 14B and his Bartholomew." She gestured to the stoic gnome on the sideboard. "I took appropriate action, as is my duty. I explained the violation and temporarily confiscated the offending article pending an application to the Architectural Review Committee. A perfectly reasonable by-the-book response. And in return," she continued, her voice rising with indignation, "I awoke to find my own property desecrated, an army of them, and now they are spreading, like a fungus. This is not random, gentlemen, and Brenda. This is a rebellion." Gary Larson finally sat up straight, his expression one of pure disbelief. "A rebellion, Agnes. They're garden gnomes. People are having a bit of fun. It's been a long year. My kids think it's hilarious. It's bringing people out. They're talking to each other. Isn't that what a community is supposed to do?" "A community," Agnes retorted, her voice dripping with ice, "is an entity governed by mutual respect for agreed-upon standards. This is not community. This is mob rule with pointy red hats. If we let this slide, what's next? Plastic flamingos. Inflatable Santas, in July. A car on blocks in every other driveway. This is the line. We must hold it." She saw the flicker of doubt in Brenda's eyes and the sheer terror in Timothy's. Gary was a lost cause, a proponent of horticultural anarchy. She had to frame this in terms they understood. "Timothy," she said, softening her tone fractionally, "think of the finances. If we show weakness, if we allow the bylaws to be flouted so openly, residents will start thinking other rules are optional too. What happens when they stop paying their dues because they don't like the rule about trash can storage? Our budget would be in shambles. No new swing set then." Gary, the mention of the swing set was a calculated, low blow, and she saw it land. Gary's jaw tightened. Timothy, however, was putty in her hands. He began nervously calculating potential revenue loss on a small notepad. "She has a point," he whispered, more to himself than anyone else. "A complete breakdown of the system is fiscally irresponsible." Brenda, ever the pragmatist, chimed in. "So what do you propose, Agnes?" "We can't exactly send in a gnome SWAT team." "We don't have to," Agnes said, a triumphant smile touching her lips. She opened her binder to a pre-marked page. "We follow procedure. I propose an immediate board-authorized issuance of violation notices to every single household displaying a non-approved lawn ornament, a 72-hour compliance window, after which we levy the standard fine of $25 per day. per violation, as outlined in Section 7, subsection D. We will be firm, we will be fair, and we will be relentless. $25 a day, Gary exclaimed. For a gnome, that's extortion. It's the bylaws, Gary, Agnes said sweetly. The same bylaws you swore to uphold when you joined this board. All I'm asking for is a vote to enforce the rules as they are written. Are you suggesting we pick and choose which covenants to follow? The question hung in the air, a perfectly crafted trap. To vote no would be to advocate for selective enforcement, a position that Timothy's procedural heart could never abide and that Brenda would find difficult to defend. Gary stared at her, a muscle working in his jaw. He saw the checkmate. He knew he was beaten. All in favor of authorizing the issuance of violation notices, as per Section 7. Agnes asked, her voice crisp and clear. Her own hand shot up. Timothy's followed, trembling slightly, after a moment's hesitation, during which she clearly weighed the potential for future juicy gossip against the unpleasantness of the immediate conflict. Brenda's hand went up too. Motion carries? 3, 2, 1, Agnes declared. Ignoring Gary's stony silence and defiant glare, she snapped the binder shut. Brenda, please draft the minutes. Timothy, prepare to process the incoming fines. I will handle the preparation and distribution of the notices myself. This rebellion ends now. For the rest of the day, Agnes's dining room was transformed into a command center. The rhythmic thump-thump of her laser printer was the only sound, spitting out page after page of official violation notices. She had designed the letterhead herself, a tasteful, embossed Willow Creek Estates logo at the top, followed by bold, capitalized text, official notice of covenant violation. Each letter was a work of art, a masterpiece of passive-aggressive bureaucracy. She cited the specific bylaws, underlined the deadline for compliance, and detailed the escalating fines in a font that was both authoritative and deeply condescending. As she worked, she felt a profound sense of purpose, the kind of clarity that comes from fighting for a righteous cause. Her eyes drifted to Bartholomew on the sideboard. You see? She murmured to the ceramic figure. This is what happens. When you don't follow the rules, it all unravels. It leads to paperwork and unpleasantness for everyone. She remembered her old neighborhood, a place called Maple Grove that had sounded so charming on the brochure. But the family next door had let their lawn grow into a jungle. They had a broken-down pickup truck that bled oil onto the driveway, and 3 dogs that barked at all hours. When Agnes had tried to sell her house, potential buyers would take one, look next door, and walk away. The chaos had cost her, literally. She had lost thousands on the sale. It was then she'd sworn an oath. Never again. Order wasn't just an aesthetic preference. It was a financial and psychological necessity. Willow Creek Estates, with its thick book of covenants, was her promised land, and she would be its zealous guardian. She stuffed the last notice into its envelope, sealing it with a satisfying press of her thumb. She would deliver them herself. After dusk, placing one in every offending mailbox like a vengeful tooth fairy. The reaction was immediate, and to Agnes's profound disgust, festive. The next morning, it was clear that her bombardment had been interpreted not as a threat, but as an invitation. Maria Rodriguez, the clear ringleader, had thrown an impromptu gnome-coming party on her lawn. Her gnomes, now numbering over a dozen, had been arranged in a diorama of the board meeting. A larger female gnome with glasses and a stern expression meant to be Agnes stood behind a pebble lectern, while other gnomes sat around a mushroom table. One gnome, representing Gary, had been tipped over backwards in its chair. It was insulting. It was brilliant. Neighbors mingled on the sidewalk, sipping lemonade from plastic cups, pointing and laughing. The defiance spread. The miller's mooning. Gnome was now joined by another holding a tiny, hand-painted sign that read, "Find me, I'm fabulous." The Patels down the street had created a gnome conga line that snaked from their prize-winning roses to their bird. The rebellion hadn't been quashed. It had been given a theme. Agnes watched from her window, her stomach churning with a mixture of rage and disbelief. They were mocking her. They were mocking the rules. Something unexpected happened. Amidst the jubilant anarchy, a single figure walked up Agnes's driveway. Agnes cradled the avian stalker 5000 like a newborn. The digital image on its display, a grainy but undeniably incriminating depiction of Mr. Hassan holding the mysterious metallic box. Her mind raced, connecting the dots with the speed and certainty of a seasoned detective in a poorly written crime novel. The gnomes were a distraction, a smokescreen for something far more nefarious happening behind the unassuming facade of Lot 14B. The late-night meeting, the secretive exchange, the weight and appearance of the package, it all pointed to something illegal, something that threatened the very fabric of Willow Creek Estates in a way. Bartholomew, the gnome, never could. Sleep remained a distant luxury. Agnes spent the rest of the night hunched over her computer, zooming in on the photograph, enhancing the contrast, trying to glean any identifying marks on the box. It was frustratingly smooth and featureless. She even ran a reverse image search online, typing in keywords like small metallic box, unmarked container, and suspicious package. But the results were predictably unhelpful. Mostly, yielding images of lunchboxes and generic industrial equipment, as dawn painted the sky in hues of pink and orange. Agnes felt a surge of decisive energy. This was beyond the purview of the HOA. This was a matter for the authorities. She printed out the photograph, the laser printer worry with a sense of urgency that matched her own. She would go to the local police station. She had evidence, a photograph, and a strong suspicion that her neighbor was involved in something shady. The Willow Creek Estates Homeowners Association had never before been the source of a police report more serious than a complaint about excessive noise from a teenage party. Agnes, dressed in her most respectable floral dress, and clutching the printed photograph in a manila envelope, felt a strange mix of trepidation and exhilaration as she walked into the sterile, brightly lit reception area of the local precinct. The officer behind the counter, a young woman with tired eyes and a name tag that read Officer Miller, looked up from her computer with a weary sigh. "How can I help you?" I have reason to believe a crime is being committed in my neighborhood," Agnes announced, her voice trembling slightly but imbued with a sense of dramatic importance. Officer Miller raised an eyebrow. "What kind of crime, ma'am?" Agnes leaned closer, lowering her voice conspiratorially. "I have photographic evidence of a suspicious exchange. Late last night, my neighbor..." She fumbled with the envelope and slid the photograph across the counter. Officer Miller picked it up, her expression remaining impassive. She studied the grainy image for a moment, then looked back at Agnes. "This is a picture of your neighbor holding a box." "It's not just a box," Agnes exclaimed, her voice rising. "It's the circumstances. The late hour, the secret meeting in his workshop, the other man. It looked very clandestine. Did you see what was inside the box, ma'am?" "No, but did you hear what they were saying?" "No, but it was clear they were being secretive." Officer Miller sighed again, a sound that suggested she had dealt with her fair share of overzealous neighborhood watch captains. "Ma'am, with all due respect, this photograph shows a man holding a box in his own backyard. That's not evidence of a crime. But don't you see?" Agnes insisted, her frustration mounting. "It could be drugs. It could be who knows what. He just moved in. He's very quiet. And then there's the gnomes." Officer Miller blinked. "The gnomes, yes, the garden gnomes. It all started with a gnome. It's a sign, a diversion." Agnes realized, perhaps a little too late, how unhinged she might sound. Officer Miller patiently explained that while she appreciated Agnes's vigilance, a photograph of a box and some garden gnomes did not constitute grounds for a police investigation. She advised Agnes to be a good neighbor and perhaps try talking to Mr. Hassan directly. Agnes left the police station feeling deflated and thoroughly dismissed. They didn't understand the gravity of the situation. They were blinded by their procedural apathy. It was up to her. She would have to gather more evidence. Returning to Willow Creek Estates, Agnes found the gnome situation had escalated even further. Now, not only were there more gnomes, but they had begun to interact. Mrs. Rodriguez had staged a gnome wedding on her lawn, complete with a miniature white gazebo and tiny flower bouquets held by even tinier gnome attendants. The Miller's mooning gnome was now surrounded by a chorus line of smaller gnomes doing the can-can. It was a full-blown ceramic circus, and it was a direct, gleeful mockery of her authority. The violation notices she had so diligently delivered seemed to have had the opposite of their intended effect. Instead of fear, they had inspired creativity and collective defiance. Agnes felt a burning resentment towards Mr. Hassan. If he hadn't started this with his unauthorized Bartholomew, none of this would be happening. Fueled by her rejection at the police station and the escalating gnome anarchy, Agnes's focus narrowed. She would prove that Mr. Hassan was up to no good. She would use her new camera to document his every move. Operation Neighborhood Watch. Level Expert was now in full effect. For the next few days, Agnes was a woman obsessed. She positioned herself, at her windows, the avian stalker 5000 constantly at the ready. She meticulously documented Mr. Hassan's comings and goings, noting the times he left the house, the make and model of his car, even the bags he carried. She zoomed in on his interactions with other neighbors, trying to decipher any coded messages or suspicious glances. Her digital photo library swelled with images of Mr. Hassan watering his lawn, collecting his mail, and even taking out his trash. Each mundane activity was scrutinized, analyzed for hidden meaning. She noticed he received a lot of packages, mostly small and nondescript. Each delivery sent a fresh wave of suspicion through her. What were these mysterious parcels? More components of his nefarious scheme, evidence she needed to uncover. One afternoon, Agnes witnessed Mr. Hassan talking to Maria Rodriguez on her front porch. Maria was gesturing animatedly, and Mr. Hassan was listening intently, a slight smile on his face. Agnes's zoom lens whirred as she captured a series of close-up shots, convinced they were discussing the next phase of their anti-HOA rebellion, or, even worse, plotting something related to the metallic box. Later that day, driven by an insatiable need to know, Agnes decided to take a more direct approach. She waited until she saw Mr. Hassan leave his house. Then she slipped across the street and, heart-pounding, peered into his open mailbox. Inside, amongst the usual bills and junk mail, was a small, brightly colored postcard. It depicted a cartoonish gnome holding a fishing rod and read, "Greetings from Gnome Depot." Agnes's breath hitched. Gnome Depot. Was this some kind of underground supplier for the neighborhood's growing ceramic menace? A source of further anarchy? She surreptitiously reached into the mailbox and slid the postcard into her pocket. Back in her house, Agnes examined the postcard under a magnifying glass. On the back was a website address. With trembling fingers, she typed it into her computer. The Gnome Depot website was a riot of color and whimsy, featuring hundreds of different garden gnomes, from traditional models to more eccentric designs. There were fishing gnomes, golfing gnomes, biker gnomes, even zombie gnomes. It was, quite simply, a website dedicated to the mass production and sale of the very figurines that were currently plaguing Willow Creek estates. A wave of dizziness washed over Agnes. Could it be this simple? Could the suspicious package and the secret meeting be related to gnomes? It seemed absurd, almost insulting. Her carefully constructed narrative of clandestine criminal activity began to crumble. Just then, her doorbell rang. Agnes, still reeling from her Gnome Depot discovery, cautiously opened the door. Standing on her porch was Mr. Omar Hassan. He held a small, rectangular package wrapped in brown paper. "Mrs. Periwinkle," he said politely, "I noticed you might have inadvertently taken my mail earlier. This was in your mailbox." He held out a large envelope addressed to her. Agnes's cheeks flushed crimson. She stammered, trying to formulate an excuse. But Mr. Hassan simply smiled faintly. "And I believe you might have mine as well," he said, gesturing to the postcard peeking out of her pocket. Agnes reluctantly handed it over, feeling a wave of shame wash over her. She had been spying on him, rifling through his mail, and jumping to wild conclusions based on nothing more than her own paranoia and a photograph of a box. Double quotes, Mrs. Periwinkle. Mr. Hassan continued, his tone becoming slightly more serious. "I understand that the gnomes might seem disruptive, but they are just a bit of harmless fun, a way for the neighbors to connect and express themselves. I have been quite surprised by the strong reaction." Agnes remained silent, unable to meet his gaze. "Regarding the other night," Mr. Hassan said, his eyes meeting hers. "The man in my workshop is my cousin. He's an engineer. We were discussing a prototype for a new type of water filtration system I'm developing. The metallic box, as you called it, contains a crucial component. I apologize if our late-night meeting caused you any concern." The air hung thick with Agnes's unspoken accusations and Mr. Hassan's patient explanation. The weight of her assumptions pressed down on her. She had been so certain of her suspicions, so quick to judge based on fleeting glimpses and her own ingrained distrust. Before Agnes could stammer out an apology, a commotion erupted down the street, loud, shouting the front. The crunch of ceramic under the security guard's boot was a sound that would echo in Agnes's mind for weeks. It was the sound of her carefully constructed world fracturing. This wasn't order. This was brute force, ugly and indiscriminate. It was chaos wearing a uniform. She stood frozen on her lawn, Mr. Hassan beside her, as the idyllic rebellious gnome displays were systematically transformed into piles of glittering, colorful rubble. The miller's mooning gnome was decapitated with a single, vicious stomp. The Patel family's conga line was obliterated in a flurry of kicks. The gnome bride and groom from Maria Rodriguez's lawn were swept into a dustpan like common trash. The neighbor's playful defiance had curdled into raw, sputtering rage. Mr. Miller, a man whose primary passion was his hybrid tea roses, was red-faced and screaming, squaring up to the hulking guard who outweighed him by a good 50 pounds. "That was a gift from my granddaughter. You have no right." Officer Davies, the security supervisor, approached with the unruffled calm of a riot control officer. "Sir, your property is in violation of the community covenants. We are contracted by your homeowners association to ensure compliance." "Compliance? This is vandalism," Maria Rodriguez shouted, her voice shaking with fury. She turned and, her eyes, burning with betrayal, locked onto Agnes. "You did this? You sent these thugs?" The accusation hit Agnes like a physical blow. The entire neighborhood was now looking at her, their expressions ranging from disbelief to outright hatred. She was the president. She was the one who had sent the letters. In their minds, she had personally ordered this jackbooted demolition. "Crew, no," Agnes stammered, taking a step forward. This is not authorized." She marched towards Officer Davies, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm of panic and indignation. "Stop this at once. Who gave you this order?" Officer Davies turned to face Agnes, her expression unreadable. "Mrs. Periwinkle, our deployment was activated this morning by a standing order from the HOA treasurer, Mr. Timothy Finch, to address unresolved covenant violations under Contract Clause 1-C. She spoke with the detached precision of a machine. "We are simply fulfilling our contractual obligations." The world tilted slightly under Agnes's feet. Timothy, nervous, spineless, procedure-obsessed, Timothy had done this. And a standing order, she had no memory of such a clause. The officer's words, delivered so publicly, were a calculated maneuver, stripping Agnes of her authority in front of the very people she was supposed to lead. She was president in name only. She looked over at Mr. Hassan. He was watching her. Not with the anger she saw in every other face, but with a profound and unnerving pity. That look was worse than any shouted insult. It was the look one gives to someone who has set their own house on fire, and is only now noticing the smoke. Defeated, Agnes retreated to the sterile silence of her own home. The sounds of destruction from outside faded as she shut the door, but the image of the shattered gnomes was burned into her mind. Bartholomew, the catalyst for this entire disaster, sat placidly on her sideboard. She stared at him, a wave of nausea rolling through her. For the first time, she saw the gnome not as a symbol of disorder, but as a casualty. She snatched her phone from the kitchen counter, her fingers trembling with rage as she stabbed at Timothy Finch's number. He answered on the fourth ring, his voice a weak, reedy squeak. Agnes, did it work? Is the situation contained? Contained. Agnes's voice was a low, dangerous hiss. Timothy, what have you done? There is a security team on site acting like a death squad for garden ornaments. They're destroying private property. The entire neighborhood thinks I've declared martial law. There was a long, panicked silence on the other end of the line, followed by the sound of a sharp, wheezing inhale. The contract, he stammered. I found it in the files from 3 years ago, before you were president. The old board signed it. A master's services agreement with community security. It has a clause for direct enforcement action. If violations persist after official notice, I thought you wanted decisive action. You said we had to hold the line. I was just trying to help. Help, Agnes shrieked, all pretense of composure gone. You've brought a lit stick of dynamite to a water pistol fight? You sniveling coward. You didn't bring this to the board. You didn't even tell me. You went behind my back and unleashed this corporate monstrosity on our neighbors. Was scared Timothy Wind, his voice cracking. They were laughing at us, Agnes. At the rules. I thought this would show them we were serious. His words struck a deeply unpleasant chord within her. I thought this would show them we were serious. How many times had she had a similar thought? His panic was a twisted reflection of her own obsession. He was the monster her own zealotry had created. There will be a board meeting, Agnes said, her voice now dangerously calm. Tonight, my house. Be there, Timothy, and you'd better be prepared to explain how you single-handedly declared war on the entire neighborhood. She hung up before he could respond, her mind a maelstrom of conflicting emotions. Guilt, fury, and a terrifying sense of responsibility. She had pushed, and finally, the weakest link in her chain of command had snapped in the worst possible way. The emergency board meeting that evening was a funereal affair. The air in Agnes's dining room was thick with unspoken accusations. Timothy Finch was a pale, sweating wreck, refusing to make eye contact with anyone. Brenda Scoggins was frantically scrolling through a legal advice website on her phone, her face a mask of anxiety. Gary Larson, however, was a volcano of suppressed rage. He sat with his arms crossed, glaring at Agnes. Well, Agnes, Gary, began his voice low and tight, are you proud of yourself? This is the order you wanted, isn't it? Smashed property and terrorized neighbors. Congratulations, you finally united the community against us. Before Agnes could respond, Brenda looked up from her phone. They're going to sue us. They're absolutely going to sue the HOA into oblivion. The Millers are already talking to a lawyer. Their granddaughter is traumatized, apparently. From the nomicide, Timothy let out a small sob. I have to sell my car. Agnes looked at the three of them, the furious pragmatist, the terrified gossip, the blubbering fool. She saw the shambles of her board, her kingdom, and in that moment, something inside her shifted. It was the sickening, humbling realization that Gary was right. This was, in a way, the logical conclusion of her crusade. She had demanded absolute compliance, and when the neighbors had responded with human wit and whimsy, the system she championed had produced an outcome of pure, mindless violence. She took a deep breath, the air tasting of dust and defeat. He's right, she said quietly. The room fell silent. All three of them stared at her as if she'd started speaking in tongues. Gary is right, she repeated, her voice stronger now. She looked directly at him. I was so focused on the letter of the law that I completely ignored the spirit of the community. I saw a harmless gnome as a threat, and I treated a minor disagreement as a declaration of war. My actions created the panic and the pressure that led to this. She gestured vaguely towards the window, towards the wounded neighborhood outside. This is my fault. The confession hung in the air, as shocking and unexpected as the arrival of the security team. Gary's anger seemed to deflate, replaced by sheer astonishment. Agnes turned to Timothy. You made a catastrophic mistake, Timothy. But you made it in an environment that I created. You thought you were being a good soldier. She then looked at the whole board. We have to fix this. Not just for the legal liability, Brenda, but because it is the right thing to do. She stood up, pacing the length of the dining table. I propose a 3-point plan. First, we issue an immediate and unconditional public apology to the entire community. Second, we terminate our contract with community security, effective immediately. Third, we will use the HOAS reserve funds to fully reimburse every resident for their damaged property. No questions asked. Timothy and Brenda nodded enthusiastically, desperate for any path out of this mess. Gary remained silent, watching Agnes with a new, searching expression. "And one more thing," Agnes added, her voice dropping. She walked over to the sideboard, picked up Bartholomew the gnome, and held him. "I propose we amend the bylaws. We will abolish the requirement for small, non-permanent garden ornaments. We will trust our neighbors to have good taste. And if they don't," she gave a wry, humorless smile, "we will learn to live with it." "I'll second that motion," Gary said softly, a flicker of respect in his eyes. The next evening, a notice was posted on the community message board, calling for an emergency town hall in the park. The atmosphere was thick with hostility as Agnes walked to the wooden gazebo that served as a makeshift stage. Nearly 100 residents were gathered, their arms crossed, their faces grim. Maria Rodriguez and the Millers stood in the front, a silent, accusatory jury. Mr. Hassan was there too, standing slightly off to the side, his expression unreadable. Agnes stepped up to the microphone, her hands trembling as she unfolded a sheet of paper. This was, without a doubt, the most difficult thing she had ever done. "Good evening," she began, her voice amplified, sounding small and frail in the open air. "I know you are all angry, and you have every right to be. What happened here yesterday was inexcusable." She delivered her. The world dissolved into a roar. Agnes stood paralyzed in the gazebo, the jeers and insults of her neighbors washing over her like a tidal wave of scalding acid. "Spy, creeper, get out of our neighborhood." The faces that had, just minutes before, shown a grudging respect for her apology were now twisted into masks of contempt. She saw Maria Rodriguez clutching her chest in theatrical horror, the Millers pointing at her with trembling fingers, and Gary Larson shaking his head with a look of utter disgust. Her meticulously crafted act of contrition had been incinerated in the flash of a single photograph. Her eyes found Mr. Hassan's. There was no pity left, there was no anger. There was only a cold hard assessment, the kind one gives to a venomous snake discovered coiled in a woodpile. He had seen the truth of her, not as she presented herself, but as she was in the secret, paranoid darkness of her own home. He gave a single, almost imperceptible shake of his head and turned away, walking back towards his house. That simple gesture of dismissal was more devastating than any shout. Agnes stumbled backward, away from the microphone, away from the hundreds of accusing eyes. She turned and fled, half walking, half running from the park, the cacophony of outrage chasing her all the way to her front door. She slammed it shut, leaning against the solid wood as if it could protect her from the shame. Her house, once her fortress of order, now felt like a prison cell. The silence inside was a hollow mockery of the storm raging outside. Her phone began to buzz on the hall table. Then it buzzed again and again. A relentless torrent of notifications. She knew what they were. Emails from the board, texts from furious residents, posts on the community forum. She could almost read them through the sealed screen. Resign. Disgrace. How could you? She silenced the device, the sudden quiet feeling even more menacing. For 3 days, Agnes did not leave her house. She became a ghost in her own life, moving from room to room, peering through the slats of her blinds at the neighborhood that had so violently disowned her. Willow Creek Estates, her pristine promised land, had become hostile territory. When she saw Mrs. Rodriguez walk by with her dog, her neighbor pointedly crossed the street to avoid her sidewalk. A group of teenagers on bikes slowed as they passed her house, one of them yelling, "Smile for the camera, creep," before they sped off, laughing. She was a pariah. Her fellow board members, her former lieutenants, abandoned her without a second thought. The emails had been brutal. Timothy Finch's was a panicked, self-serving screed about how she had misled him. Brenda Scoggins was a terse two-sentence demand for her immediate resignation to mitigate the catastrophic PR fallout. Even Gary Larson, who had witnessed her flicker of self-awareness, had simply written, "It's over, Agnes. For the good of the neighborhood, just go." But a new, more sinister form of order was descending upon Willow Creek. Community security. Their sleek black cars, which had once been a rare sight, now patrolled the streets with unnerving frequency. They had become an occupying force. Officer Davies, it seemed, was determined to prove her company's value. Fines were issued for infractions so minor they bordered on the surreal. The Patels received a $20 ticket because their wind chimes were deemed to be in violation of the noise ordinance during a particularly breezy afternoon. A notice was taped to the Miller's door for improper hedge height, citing a 1/4 inch. Gary Larson's son left his skateboard on the driveway for less than an hour and found it impounded, retrievable only after paying a $50 storage fee. From her window, Agnes watched this new regime with a growing sense of horror. This wasn't the personal, albeit obsessive, stewardship she had practiced. This was cold, impersonal, and predatory. It was the soulless logic of a corporation enforcing a contract, wringing every last cent out of the residents. This was tyranny by spreadsheet. She had been so afraid of a car on blocks, and in her fear, she had paved the way for a police state that measured the decibels of wind chimes. She, Agnes Periwinkle, had traded a few whimsical gnomes for a legion of revenue-hungry martinets. The irony was so bitter it made her teeth ache. On the 4th day of her self-imposed exile, Agnes hit rock bottom. She sat at her gleaming mahogany dining table, the site of so many of her failed campaigns for order, and stared at the lone figure still keeping her company, Bartholomew, the impounded gnome. His cheerful, painted-on smile seemed to mock her. "Well," she said aloud, her voice raspy from disuse. "You were right all along, weren't you?" She picked up the ceramic gnome, its weight feeling solid and real in her trembling hands. "I thought you were the problem, a crack in the foundation, a sign of things to come." She paced the room, cradling the gnome like a holy relic, but the crack wasn't in the flower bed, was it? It was in me. Tears she hadn't realized were there began to well in her eyes. "I was so scared," she whispered to the inanimate object, so terrified of it all falling apart, like it did at Maple Grove. "The noise, the mess, the losing money on the house. I thought if I could just control everything here, the color of the doors, the placement of the shrubs, the existence of Euthan, I would be safe. Then my investment would be safe. My life would be safe." A dry, hacking sob escaped her lips. "And look what I did. I turned my neighbors into enemies. I turned a good man into a suspect. I spied on him. I was going to ruin him, all because he brought a little bit of joy into his garden." She looked at the gnome's placid face. "I became the thing I feared. I became the chaos. And then, I hired monsters to clean it up." She placed Bartholomew back on the table, her hands steady now. The confession, even to an audience of one, had been a release. The self-pity and shame that had paralyzed her began to coalesce into something new, something hard and sharp: resolve. She had broken this neighborhood, and even if they threw her out, even if she had to sell her house and move away in disgrace, she would not leave it in the clutches of community security. She had to try and fix it. And that meant doing the single most humiliating, terrifying thing she could possibly imagine. That with a deep breath that felt like plunging into icy water, she walked out her front door, into the glaring afternoon sun. She didn't look at the neighboring houses or the whispering curtains. She kept her eyes fixed on one destination. Lot 1 for B. The walk across the street felt like a mile-long trek across a battlefield, each step an agony of humility. She reached Mr. Hassan's front door, and before she could lose her nerve, she rang. The bell. The door opened. Mr. Hassan stood there, his face a mask of cold neutrality. He did not invite her in. He simply waited. "Mr. Hassan," Agnes began, her voice shaking. I have come to apologize." He remained silent, his dark eyes watching her, giving her nothing. "There's no excuse for what I did," she said, forcing herself to meet his gaze. "My behavior was monstrous. I violated your privacy in the most disgusting way. I let my own fear and paranoia turn me into someone I don't even recognize. I was wrong. About everything. About you, about the gnomes. About what it means to be a neighbor. I am deeply, profoundly sorry." Still, he said nothing. His silence was a judgment, and she deserved every second of it. "I am not here to ask for your forgiveness," she continued, her voice gaining a desperate urgency. "I don't deserve it. I am here because the mess I created is now a monster that is devouring this entire neighborhood. Community security is strangling us, and it's my fault. That contract, it's ironclad, but I know it better than anyone. I've read every line of every bylaw and every agreement this HOA has ever signed. There might be a way out, a loophole. I can't fight them alone. I have no credibility, no support. Nobody will listen to me." She took a final shuddering breath. "But they will listen to you. You are the one who has been wronged the most. You have the moral authority. I am not asking you to trust me. I am asking you to use me, use my knowledge. Let me help you undo the damage I have caused." Mr. Hassan stared at her for a long, agonizing moment. Agnes could see the conflict in his eyes, the righteous anger at this woman who had invaded his life, warring with the concern for the community she had described. Just then, a small face peeked around the doorframe, a young girl of about 8, with her father's kind eyes, now wide with fear. She looked at Agnes, then at her father. That glance seemed to decide it for him. He looked back at Agnes, his expression still hard, but with a flicker of something new. "Pragmatism? The contract," he said, his voice low and firm. "Where is it?" A wave of relief so powerful it almost buckled Agnes's knees washed over her. He hadn't slammed the door. He hadn't called the police. He had given her a chance. "At my house, in the files. Get it?" he said. And then, after another charged pause, he stepped aside. "And bring it here." Hours later, they were seated not at Agnes's tainted dining table, but at Mr. Hassan's. His house was filled with the warm, spicy scent of cardamom, and the quiet clutter of a happy family life. His daughter Layla occasionally peeked in at them, her initial fear replaced by a shy curiosity. It was a world away from the sterile order of Agnes's home. They pored over the community security contract, a dense, 30-page document filled with legalese. Agnes's mind, once used to hunt for infractions, was now hunting for an escape. They analyzed the clause Timothy had cited, 1 to C, regarding direct enforcement action. Here,